Hello, everyone. I'm sorry I couldn't be here in person. One of the core principles of CARP is family. And as you are here today on Zoom, I'm actually with my family coming back from Vermont to see the solar eclipse. In the principles of creation, which we've been discussing in these various CARP talks, one of the very important aspects that we talk about, which is known as the third blessing, is to have dominion over creation. That doesn't just mean use it to our advantage, but that also means engaging in give and receive action, another concept we've talked about with the creation. And being close enough to Vermont where the solar eclipse's path is coming, our family felt that it was very important to not miss this opportunity to interact with God's creation, with our heavenly parents' creation. So forgive me, that's why I am not in person today. But I hope that in sharing this talk, I'm sharing it through not just sharing, but also living out these principles that we're talking about. And one of these universal principles that I'd like to talk about today is a concept known as a period of growth or growing period. Now, in the past few weeks, we've talked about several things. We've talked about how everything in the universe exists through relationships of give and receive action, relationships of subject partner and object partner. And that creates what's called a four-position foundation, where centered on our creator, whether you'd like to call that God, Heavenly Parent, Allah, Jehovah, Elohim, a subject partner and an object partner form a relationship and together create a result, whether it's a unity between the subject partner and object partner or a whole new thing. And we examined that most closely in one of my previous talks a few weeks ago on the relationship and communication with our mind and body. But in that talk, there was one question that you may or may not have thought of, which is, why do human beings not successfully engage in this relationship? Why isn't this an automatic communication? Why is it a struggle? Why is it difficult? One reason we gave was that, explained through various religions and philosophies, somehow we inherited a contradiction after we were created, which meant that there was a part of us in divine principle called the evil mind that seeks selfishness and primarily wants to focus on the body instead of our original good self, which at the core is heart or our mind. But another reason why it's difficult actually is because the answer to this question, why do we need a growing period? Why does it take time for our mind and body to unite to achieve maturity? Is because actually human beings are the only thing that have to choose this path of growth. But before we even talk about that, let's talk about whether it's true that a growing period is a universal principle. So the divine principle makes the argument that everything in the universe, from the smallest atomic particle to the biggest interplanetary structures and galaxies, take time to grow. For example, if you examine the formation of the universe, it took billions of years to get into the state that it is today. Originally, there was just this infinitesimally small mass of infinite energy. And the Big Bang Theory asserts that it essentially just blew up within itself and just expanded rapidly. And it didn't just expand and then there were galaxies and planets and there was the Earth. No, it took billions of years for those energies, whatever they are. I'm not a scientist, like you know from the previous talk, but whatever those energies were, from my understanding of the Big Bang Theory, slowly over the course of billions of years coalesced into stars, into solar systems, into galaxies, which are clusters of stars, and eventually formed into planets and asteroids. And gravity took its course. And even if you look at the science and theories behind the formation of the Earth actually took around 4 to 4.5 billion years to form. It started, from my understanding, I was a astronomy buff as a little kid. I used to always go through the astronomy textbooks. So that's why I know a bit about this stuff. But in any case, from what those textbooks showed me as a kid, originally the Earth was formed together by large clusters of space rock and asteroids forming together through the pull of gravity. And then there's another theory which suggests that actually a massive asteroid hit the Earth as it was forming, and the bits and pieces broken off of the Earth formed the moon, as you can see in this photograph. And then originally Earth was full of lava and volcanic material, and then slowly it became a water body, and then slowly landmass began to appear, and then slowly the tectonic plates began to separate. That's how you get how Earth is today. And even the formation of life took time. It started with bacteria and microscopic life forms in the water and the oceans. And then slowly it evolved bit by bit until eventually, when we study the theory of evolution, we get to human beings, all from microscopic particles found billions of years ago in Earth's oceans. And it's even a religious truth that everything in the universe has a growing period. That's why, for example, in the Judeo-Christian tradition, we find that God created the universe in 6 days. And after each day, it describes how, quote, and there was evening and there was morning, one day. Now, what's interesting about that is that this seems like the reverse order. Maybe it should say there was a day and there was a night, because you often begin your day, in the morning. But what this is signifying is a further elucidation that everything in the universe has a growing period. It doesn't just grow, it doesn't just appear like that. Some people have that misconception when they read the Judeo-Christian tradition of the Bible, thinking that God just did literally say, let there be light, let there be this, let there be that. But although God did say, let there be this, let there be that, after he said it, it actually had to happen. And how it happened took billions of years. How did light come into the universe? That could imply stars, for example. That took billions of years to create, so on and so forth. So everything in the universe has a growing period, and human beings are no exception. And I would like to argue that there's no exception even for our creator, God. And the divine principle makes this perspective. It makes this argument about it when it says, he, God, is a being of the number 3. All created beings, having been conceived in the likeness of God, manifest their existence, movement, and growth through a course of 3 stages. Now, how do we know that God grows? For God, the origin to create the universe, he would have to engage in the same relationships that we've been talking about apply to human beings. A relationship between subject partner and object partner. The relationship that creates something. A 4-position foundation. Now, God's idea of the universe, which, we know was created, had to have a give and receive action between God's self, like within God's self. Why is this so? God had to engage in give and receive action within his self because energy does not come about standing still. Energy does not come about by itself. It needs to interact with something. The whole point of give and receive action is that it creates energy. Within human beings' relationships, it creates energy of love, energy of harmony, energy of integration. And that energy is often manifested, for example, between a husband and wife in a new creation, a child, or between coworkers in profits or a new invention. But energy always requires a subject partner and object partner having give and receive action. And the divine principle calls this, to use its terms, an origin, division, union, action. So God, the origin, to create the universe, had to engage in a relationship between subject and object within itself in order to create the universe. That's what I mean by God grows. For God's idea to grow, for the universe, this had to happen. For God to manifest as a true heavenly parent towards children, in other words, human beings, That takes time. God's creation has a growing period. God's dream has a growing period. But one of the things that it talks about in divine principle is that God is fully God's self when God can manifest fully within every single human being. And that requires growth. Why? Because human beings have a growing period. I hope that makes sense. Now, how does this apply to our life? So far, it's been a lot of theory and kind of superficial talk. Yes, we know everything has a growing period, but especially this recent point about how everything exists through a 3-stage growing process and how even God has to follow this within himself. But how does it work in human beings? Where can we see 3 stages of growth within human beings? Now, categorization is kind of a tricky thing because you could easily say, well, there's 4 or 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 or 9 stages of growth. But from the perspective of how relationships work and how creations are created, the divine principle takes this perspective that it is a 3-stage process of origin, division, and union. Starting with God, secondly, a relationship between a subject partner and an object partner, and then lastly, a creation. So for example, when we talked about mind-body unity, we talked about how centered on God, our heavenly parent, whose hopes for us are to grow to maturity, our mind and body engage in a give and receive action, creating a mature character within ourselves. Now, the divine principle calls these 3 stages formation stage, growth stage, and completion stage, respectively. Now, how does this look in human being? Now we've gotten all the logical and philosophical foundation for this, of why are we saying we have 3 stages, why everything has a growing period. Now, in human beings, when a baby is born, it can't do anything for itself. It's totally dependent on its parents, especially the mother, actually almost entirely on the mother. And then even as it grows into a toddler and a small child, when you're involved in parenting, I'm not a parent, but I have experience working with kids. When you're involved in parent-like care, at this age, around, from the time they're born to around 7, I'd say, it's a lot of yes or no. For example, you're not going to explain to your kid why he should look both ways before he crosses the street, or why you need to hold mommy's hand before you cross the street. It's called you do it, and if you don't, consequence. Why? Because that's as simple of an explanation as they're going to get at that age. And that's as simple an explanation that will keep them safe. But children grow. They start asking more questions. They keep asking the question, why this? Why? I work with kindergarten through 5th grade, and the 3rd through 5th graders keep asking me why. And sometimes I get frustrated. But it's because this is the time where they begin to explore more, explore morality, explore ethics, explore what's right and wrong, explore themselves. What do they believe? What are even the parts of their bodies? What is their family like? This is what we call the growth stage. And then the completion stage, the final stage before human beings become adults, is the teenage years, which most of us have been in recently. And what's interesting about this stage is that this stage marks completion once there's a transition from adolescence to adulthood. Now, what does this mean practically speaking? You know, when you're a teenager, and I remember this, it was only a few years ago, there's a lot of rebelling against my parents. There's a lot of questioning authority and going against authority. There's a lot of, I think I know what I'm doing. I think I know what's right for me. I think I know how to live my life. But in actuality, you don't. You really, really don't. And once an adolescent or a teenager recognizes the hope that their parents have for them, that is a chief sign of maturity and a chief sign of adulthood. This was so true in my life. When I was in this later half of the growth stage and into the completion stage in my teenage years, I had a period of time where I was rebelling against my parents. Why? because I didn't understand why, for example, they had me have curfews on school nights. I didn't understand why they wouldn't let me work on school nights. I didn't understand why they wouldn't let me hang out with my friends all the time. I didn't understand. I thought they were crazy. And I had other teenagers affirming that they were crazy. And even though my parents aren't perfect, what I found out later in life, like at the end of senior year, was that actually my parents had an incredible, incredible hope for me. And that hope was for me to not just go to a good college, make sure I'm well educated, make sure I'm well informed in life, but it was actually to make me the best man I can be for my own family. And as soon as I realized that, I felt so overwhelmed actually with emotion. I even cried several times actually, because my rebellious phase was kind of bad. But from there, reflecting back, it was from that moment that I really began to transition into adulthood. Now, that's a marker that I've seen. And when we look at our lives, one thing to kind of measure where we're at in these 3 stages of growth, where we're at in our maturity of character, one of the ways to find that out is by seeing how much we understand our parents, despite their imperfections. Because being able to understand and know our parents' hope for us will make it easier to understand God, the absolute good parents' hope for us. Because it is only when we are in a mature, full relationship with God, our heavenly parent, that not only can God reside within us, allowing God to fully grow himself from a certain point of view, but also we will be able to pass on that maturity to others in our own families. And so it's really critical, and also to strive to mature our characters, we need to strive for the absolute standard of goodness, which is God. And a practical way we can do that is by trying to do that within our own families. There's a saying from the founders of CARP that the family is the school of love. Why is it a school? A school is where you learn. In these 3 stages of human growth, we are learning how to love appropriately, whether it's with our siblings, our friends, our families, other adults, or in the future, a spouse. That's what the human stages of growth, that's what it differs from with compared to the rest of the universe. Because a big question that we have in life is well, no, not how. Why is it so hard for us? And why aren't we just born automatically? That was the question I posed in the beginning of this talk. The rest of the universe does grow automatically. Protons and electrons form atoms. It just happens. Plants reproduce without being told to. Plants tilt to the sun. They're not told to. The stars and astronomical objects in the universe, in space, the Earth and the moon, all the planets, the sun, they all follow the laws of gravity. Nothing tells them to. The sun orbits around the galaxy, the Earth orbits around the sun. Nothing tells it to. It just does because within its nature. Why then does our nature to follow these universal principles, why is it not automatic? It's because of love. If the core of a relationship between us and God, the core with the relationships with other human beings is love, if our core as human beings, like I mentioned a few weeks ago, is love, is heart, the irresistible impulse to love, then it's a choice. We have to choose it. God can't just make us automatons and do it automatically. That's why in the divine principle it says human beings, however, are created in such a way that their growth requires the fulfillment of their own portion of responsibility, in addition to the guidance provided by the principle. You could say guidance provided by the principles like the laws of gravity. Like I just said, the earth, the moon, and the sun and everything, just follow it naturally. We have a natural way we want to go, but we still have to choose that way. And it's even harder when we have this contradiction within ourselves. So because it's so hard, we need practical ways to grow to maturity. Now, if you're a religious person, for example, these habits include prayer. Prayer is super important. It's your effort in relating with God. It's your effort in giving and receiving love with the Creator. Meditation is another way to do this, even if you're not religious. In meditation, a common norm of it is you're connecting to the good within yourself. You're connecting to the best parts of yourself and sorting out whatever's negative within you. Same thing with reflection. It's another activity that both religious and non-religious people do. But even if you're not religious at all, not spiritual at all, there's still things you can do. For example, physical health, making sure you're eating correctly, not having too many processed foods, because then your body's not going to grow well. And then your spirit naturally is going to be like, ugh. Working out, sleeping well is very important. These are all things we can grow to maturity. Kids, for example, who eat well and are active well, oftentimes, at least physically speaking, grow up well. But kids who are on screens all day, eating junk food all day, like Cheeto Puff kids, where like they're on the control, you know that meme, like they have just tons of Cheeto dust everywhere, or Taki dust is the new thing nowadays. They're just playing video games all day, and they're just gaining weight. And then when they're adults, it's not going to be as good. They might have the possibility of developing obesity. And then it's harder actually to engage in your original human nature, which is heart, because by not tackling your growth, you're struggling to love yourself. But the most key thing of all, despite these spiritual and physical habits, is fostering healthy, loving relationships with people around you, with the creation, and with God. Because it is through, like we talked about, it is through a relationship of give and receive action between subject partners and object partners centered on our Heavenly Parent that creates mature character, that creates growth. That's the very amazing thing about what the divine exposition of the divine principle is teaching us. It's actually teaching us that the way to grow ourselves, or the best way we can do so, is through relationships. Because by engaging in relationships, we are following this 3-step growth process. We are able to pass through these 3 stages. All, of course, centered on our Heavenly Parent and our original mind or heart, instead of a selfish nature within us. So the takeaway with the growing period is that we are able to grow ourselves. We have the capacity, we have the ability to mature ourselves. Why? Because not only is it the course in which human beings are supposed to go, we're supposed to go through a growing period, but also because it's how we can live a fulfilling life. We find fulfillment through relationships. We find fulfillment through inner peace. We find fulfillment through physical health. So I hope that today in this talk, I was able to convey adequately how the whole universe, including human beings, goes through a growing period, why it's a choice for human beings to grow, and how it's a 3-stage process based on how relationships are also through a 3-stage process, through the perspective of the divine principle, which is through a 4-position foundation. So thank you so much. Once again, I'm sorry I couldn't be here. I was having some internal growth and give and receive action with nature. And I hope you guys have a lively discussion. Signing off. Thank you.